Stand with Sudan. Darfur needs you now more than ever to speak up. Darfur's genocide has been ongoing for over 20 years, and the number of civilian casualties increases every day while the world remains silent. Dear Darfur Women's Action Group supporters, DWAG supporters, we are reaching out to you with an urgent appeal. Since November 2023, with the exception of El Fasher in North Darfur, Darfur has fallen entirely under the control of the Rapid Support Forces, RSF. In El Janina, West Darfur alone, the RSF has slaughtered over 15,000 people with countless more casualties across Darfur and Sudan ongoing, undocumented. Civilian deaths have escalated to alarming rates, yet the world remains silent. In a recent report, Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, confirmed that a child dies every 2 hours in Zamzam camp in North Darfur. Before this crisis, Darfur was home to over 122 internally displaced people, IDP camps, where 3 million people have lived for over 2 decades. They remain unable to turn home, their land stolen, and their attackers still unpunished. The international community's inaction indirectly legitimizes the slaughter and extermination of Sudan's indigenous African population in Darfur. This is why we urgently need your help. Since April 15, 2023, Sudan has been engulfed in violence sparked by a power struggle between the RSF and Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF. This war has torn the country apart, causing unspeakable suffering. The RSF has occupied civilians' homes using rape and sexual violence as weapons of war, while the SAF's shells and bombardments have destroyed homes, markets, and essential infrastructure. In both Khartoum and Darfur, RSF fighters have committed widespread sexual and gender-based violence, including abductions and sexual slavery. Starvation is now being used as a weapon of war by both sides. While the atrocities in Khartoum constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity, in Darfur, active genocide is being systematically carried out against indigenous Africans. The international community must act immediately to end the violence and hold those responsible accountable. Patterns of ethnically targeted attacks and extermination of indigenous Africans in Darfur. The RSF's attack in Darfur are systematically and explicitly aimed at the indigenous African population. Civilians have been massacred and deprived of food, water, and medical assistance, with the RSF deliberately cutting off all means of survival. As a result, a large portion of the population has been forced into mass displacement since the start of the conflict. This genocidal strategy has been most apparent in El Janina, West Darfur, where an estimated 15,000 indigenous Masli people were brutally murdered by the RSF and its allied militias. Similar atrocities have unfolded in Khartoum and Tawila in North Darfur, Mornay in West Darfur, and Nayal in South Darfur, where countless lives have been lost and residents forced to flee their homes with little hope of returning in the future. Hundreds of thousands of civilians have fled to neighboring Chad, while other survivors have been taken refuge in El Fasher, now internally displaced persons, IDPs, and remain under siege and escalated attacks for more than 11 months. El Fasher is the most dangerous place for civilians today. The city remains under continuous shelling, targeting civilians and healthcare infrastructure, with the RSF recently bombing 4 local hospitals. Major roads in and out of the city are blocked, preventing fuel, goods, and humanitarian aid into the city. Both Zamzam and Abu Shuk camp, home to 800,000 displaced people, have been attacked, and the situation is further worsened by a blockade of humanitarian aid, access, and lack of water. The recent formation of a parallel government led by the RSF is the most dangerous development in the history of the war. This new genocidal government will usher in the final stage of genocide, exterminating and replacing the indigenous Africans. The recent sanctioned attacks on civilians continue, particularly in displacement camps in Darfur. Life-saving humanitarian aid remains blocked, and the suffering is only deepening with the threat of famine and outbreaks of disease. Now more than ever, we must ensure that the swift and decisive action for civilian protection and humanitarian aid is taken by the U.S., UN, and the AU to stop this genocide and save lives. The danger of Darfur under full control by the RSF. Currently, over 98% of Darfur is in a state of chaos, with much of the region beyond the government's control as the power of government's authorities dwindles. Darfur, an area the size of France, is now dominated by the RSF, with only 2 cities partially controlled by the SFF. The RSF has intensified its attacks, seizing homes, blocking civilians' movements, and tightening the grip on the region. If this continues, it could mark the final stage of extermination of Darfur's indigenous people, including survivors of 2003 genocide. The RSF and Janjaweed militias are repeating the horrors of the 2003 genocide on a larger and more devastating scale. Once limited to attacks on horseback, the Janjaweed have evolved into nationally recognized RSF, equipped with advanced weapons and backed by powerful regional and international supporters. The violence and warring military parties have severely limited the ability of international humanitarian agencies, journalists, and UN diplomats to enter Darfur, leaving genocide victims to fend for themselves. The RSF has consolidated its control over Darfur's 5 states, establishing itself as one of the most systematic genocidal forces in history. Despite this, world leaders remain silent or offer only minimal condemnation. We at DWAG say no to the silence and the escalating genocide in Darfur and ask you to add your voice. The presence of multinational troops in Darfur. The RSF has proven to be a multinational militia. While the majority of its troops are from Sudan, many more are from West and Central African countries, including Arab militias, respectively from the Republic of Mali, Niger, Central African Republic, Chad, and Libya. The introduction of cross-border uncontrolled troops alone proves to be a dangerous trend. With the history of terrorist activities from Sudan to Mali in the region, if left unchecked, those temporary militia forces may evolve into ISIS or Al-Qaeda army-like regional extremist forces, fueling crises that both international and regional actors will be forced to respond to, but it will be too late to contain them. Such a regional supply of troops from various countries equally makes control or a solution at the national level impossible. Therefore, the humanitarian crisis in Sudan is not just a regional issue, it's a global catastrophe. And what you can do to help. Okay, I'm going to read some of these suggestions, even though I might not agree with everything, but I'm going to read this. In the face of genocide and current unspeakable atrocities, solutions must take an atrocity prevention approach that starts with civilian protection and distribution of humanitarian aid. This should be followed by pursuing accountability for the most serious international crimes, which will then create an environment that enables the peaceful transformation of Sudan. Therefore, we need you to add your voices to ours to call on the U.S. government and the member states of the UNSC take the following steps. Immediately deploy UN force to intervene robustly to protect civilians and to stop the genocide in Darfur. Open an unhindered humanitarian accessibility channel in Sudan and Darfur to reach those in need, whether their government permits it or not. Whether the Sudanese government permits it or not. Pursue accountability for those most responsible for past and current genocidal attacks, war crimes, and crimes against humanity committed in Darfur and across the Sudan. Impose targeted sanctions such as freezing assets, travel bans, and sanctioning all businesses associated with the 2 warring generals in Sudan, and cutting the funding for weapons. Hold regional enablers of the genocide in Darfur accountable, including regional international actors, supplying funds and weaponry to RSF. The U.S. must release funding for humanitarian aid and provide support to civil society organizations and women to ensure they have a voice at all levels of the decision-making processes regarding solutions to the current crises. Increase refugee settlement from neighboring countries in the U.S., Canada, and EU member states for refugees who remain at high risk. and unable to return to Sudan. Okay. Now, the crisis in Sudan and catastrophe in Darfur are of global magnitude, which requires global response. We must speak with one voice and demand our government and the UN to work for an end. Your voice and support can end this genocide and hold perpetrators accountable. With our collective effort, we can make a difference. With gratitude, Niamat Ahmadi and the DWAG, Darfur Women's Action Group team. Now, my analysis, first I didn't know Darfur was as large as France, but I learned from this article that this article is a bit dated, but there is citing that there's an international force attacking Sudan, and it connects it to Mali, which we know is one of the founding members of the Sahel Alliance, AES. So Sudan is part of the Sahel, and which we also know as Balad al-Sudan, the Black Kingdoms, or the Sahel, which is basically a coastal line, or it's basically a regional line across Black Africa versus at the border of Arab Africa. So it's been this since the news has been updated that this is United Arab Emirates that's partially behind a lot of the genocide. Those are Arab versus Black issue going back thousands of years, with Egypt and Sudan both being connected, ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, ancient Kush. So this is a contemporary, modern day, genocide and pushing back of indigenous Black people out of Northeast Africa or Northern Africa, and that's what the Sahel Alliance is dealing with. A lot of anti-Black genocide, basically, race-based war. So I would be angling for the Sahel Alliance to expand to Chad and Sudan. I know Darfur with the Masalit community has connections. Northern Nigeria, the Hausa, the Songhai Zarma, or Zarma Songhai, the Kanuri, Kanembu people have ties to the Sahel Alliance. So Northern Nigeria, Chad, and Sudan, the Zaghawa people of Sudan and Chad, Darfur, Masalit, Chad. Darfur is on the border of Chad, so Northern Nigeria, Chad, Sudan, the Sahel Alliance of Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso. That would be the natural evolution. I think there's Ethiopia, the Federation of Ethiopia. They could make a decision hosting the African Union, but I think it would be a natural evolution from Northern Nigeria, Chad, Sudan, perhaps Ethiopia to be added to the discussion of Sahel security. Just thinking that Biafra, the United States of Biafra, could have a role in promoting and centralizing these discussions. The large population of Biafra, we have people throughout the world in certain positions where we can work with governments to raise the voice. Work with community leaders, ambassadors to raise the voice of Sudan. Because Sudan, the borders were drawn up, in the Berlin conferences, West Congo conferences. So Sudan, Chad, Nigeria, Niger, these Burkina Faso, Mali, these countries, these Sahelian countries are basically the borders hide the fact that the communities are interrelated and migrate regardless of what the borders say. So, and that affects security where people just migrate. As the article says, from Mali, terrorists are migrating all the way from Mali, Central African Republic, into Sudan. I don't know if Nigeria is mentioned, but it's all one region, so This article was, just reading this article was about getting the information out, and going forward we'll try to see if we can integrate the Sudan into the Sahel Lines project. Creating a larger Black Empire Federation stretching from Mali, the Masi, Burkina Faso, Ouagadougou, the Hausa lands, Nigeria, Niger, trying to get the indigenous leadership back in place, Chad, Sudan. So, Kanem-Bornu Empire being the headquarters of the east of the Nile. So we're going to keep working, and yeah, that's the end of the video. Thank you for listening.